Hey, it's me again. I'm gonna continue reading from my book, The Secret Lives of the First Ladies. Here we go. Face Off. Louisa and John Quincy fought over many things, including makeup. While in Europe, Louisa followed the latest fashion and took to wearing rouge, which her husband argued made her look more like a strumpet than a diplomat's wife. He actually wiped it off her face on at least one occasion. A determined Louisa finally got fed up while getting ready for an appearance at court, insisted that JQA shut up and deal with it. She was wearing rouge, and that was that. John Quincy stormed out of the house and boarded the carriage and left without her. From Russia with love. Louisa hated life in Russia. The schedule of court appearances and balls kept her and John Quincy out to the wee hours almost every night. The winters were appalling and long, and the hired help was hopeless. The Russian household had a revolving doors for servants who were constantly caught loafing around or stealing things. When she received word from her husband in December of 1814 to pack everything up and join him in Paris, it came as a godsend. But it also came as a shock. After all, she would have to sell most of their possessions, then trek clear across Europe with her young son Charles Francis and a few servants, all without the husband who was accustomed to handling things without her. It was a daunting prospect. She had no idea. Their journey westward began in February, and Arctic temperatures have froze all their provisions solid. Only melting them with candles made them eatable. They got lost several times amidst the snow-clad vistas, traveling in a horse-drawn sled that often broke down. Crossing frozen rivers meant that men had to proceed ahead of them using poles to probe for weak spots. Their lodgings along the way were deplorable, and the service didn't make things any easier. Louisa began to worry very seriously about getting robbed and abandoned. They eventually arrived in Berlin and prevailed upon friendships that had been made on previous visits during JQA's extensive diplomatic travels. But the trip ahead was going to be just as dangerous, if not more so. Napoleon made his triumphant return to France and sent all of Europe scurrying to arms. Louisa's party passed through corpse-strewn battlefields, ever watchful for marauding troops. By the time they reached France, the marital tension had come to a head, and French armies were everywhere. Louisa, abandoned by her servants who were afraid of being drafted, now relied for her and Charles' safety on a 14-year-old Prussian boy, their only escort. Louisa borrowed her son's toy sword, displaying it in the window of the carriage after learning that those with military hardware were less likely to be bothered by marching brigades. It worked, but only most of the time. She had to rely on craftier methods to reach Paris, including passing herself off as Napoleon's sister to crowds of soldiers. Wow. At long last, after a six-week odyssey, Louisa and Charles Francis arrived in Paris. They were welcomed by an astonished John Quincy Adams, who listened to every word of his wife's incredible account with pride and admiration. Louisa's heroics were soon the stuff of diplomatic legend. She became the lady of the hour. The journey remains the most memorable chapter of her life and one of the most harrowing ordeals suffered by an American First Lady. Rachel Jackson, 1767 to 1828. Andrew Jackson's wife was a devout Christian who had no desire whatsoever to be First Lady. As it happened, she never had to be. She passed away after her husband had won the very contentious 1828 presidential campaign against John Quincy Adams. A campaign in which Rachel's name, much more than Andrew's, was dragged through the mud with merciless glee by political opponents. It was one hell of a way to spend the last year of her life that had plenty of hardship. Rachel had married a man named Louis Richards when she was 17, and she came to regret her decision almost immediately. Robards was an insanely jealous man who tended to erupt whenever his sociable wife exchanged even the smallest pleasantries with other men, including Andrew Jackson. It turns out that Robards had every reason to worry about Jackson had taken a particular shine to Rachel. Moreover, Rachel had taken a shine to Jackson. Arguments and threats ensued, and the two men almost settled the issue with a duel. When Robards became even more combustive than usual, Rachel decided she'd had enough and fled south to Spanish territory, escorted significantly by Jackson. Robards finally decided to cut his estranged wife loose and arranged for a divorce. Rachel then married Jackson in the summer of 1791. Only discovered that her divorce wasn't officially final before a second wedding, making her a bigamist and an adulterer. Oops. Really? Oops. Rachel and Andrew settled the confusion by remarrying after the divorce was finalized, but the damage had been done. Damage that Jackson's opponents whipped into a scandal years later in 1828. Though the experience had humbled her and made her obsessively pious, Rachel was pilloried in the press as a wanton woman, and her husband was cast as a wife stealer. Fat lot of good it did, John Quincy Adams, who lost the election anyway. As for Rachel, she died shortly before Christmas 1828, spared from the fate of assuming the First Lady role that she dreaded. Wow. So she married Andrew Jackson before she finally realized that she wasn't actually fully divorced from her first husband, Louis Robards. Okay. Oops. Big oops. Well, that's all I can say is oops. Hannah Van Buren, 1783 to 1819. Hannah Van Buren was born in Kinderhook, New York, the same hometown the man she would one day marry, future President Martin Van Buren. We know that Hannah spoke Dutch at least as well as English, a trait shared by Martin. That she was a sort of modest, charitable Christian that was revered at the time, and that she was a member of the local French Presbyterian Church, which she joined only because there weren't any local churches of the Dutch Reformed variety. Aside from these bare facts, and that she died some 18 years before her husband became President of the United States, historians know very little about her. Interestingly, Martin himself hardly helped. In the autobiography he wrote late in life, he failed to mention Hannah a single time. That's right. Martin Van Buren wrote an autobiography in which his only wife simply didn't rank as important enough to mention. Oi! Definitely. Oi! Why? What? I mean, like, what? That's all I can say is, what? I thought George W. Bush was bad. Martin Van Buren was even worse. He never mentioned his wife once in his autobiography. What the hell? Ugh. Anyways, Chapter 6. Anna Harris, July 25th, 1775 through February 25th, 1864. Married November 25th, 1795. Presidential husband, William Henry Harrison. Children, Elizabeth Bassett, John Clevis Siemens, Lucy Singleton, William Henry Jr., John Scott Benjamin, Mary Siemens, Carter Bassett, Anna Tussell, and James Finlay. That's a lot of children. Yikes. First Lady. At 1841. And that's it. For 1 year. Astrological sign. Leo. Religion. Presbyterian. Sound. I hope, my dear, you'll always bear upon your mind that you are born to die, and we know not how soon death may overtake us. It will be little consequence if we are rightly prepared for the event. To son William. Raising a family in frontier America wasn't easy. In the end, Hannah Harrison outlived 9 of her 10 children. Oh. Wait, One was still alive when she died? Damn. Anna Tussell Symes Harrison never wanted to be First Lady. In fact, she never wanted Elizabeth to be president, and for good reason. By the time he was elected to the position, they were both getting too old for such shenanigans. Her husband, William Henry Harrison, should have listened to her. After only a month in office, he was dead, and Hannah never even got to step foot in the White House. Anna was born in Sussex County, New Jersey, the second daughter of John Cleese Symes and Anna Tussell Symes. She never knew her mother, who died a year after she was born, and John took the girl to be raised by her maternal grandparents on Long Island while they fought the British during the Revolution. She was given the finest formal education that money could buy, and soon developed into a pious, learned, level-headed young woman. At 19, when she moved to the Northwest Territory to join her father and his third wife, Anna was running behind schedule in the husband finding department. In those days, it was common for ladies to marry at 16 or 17. She soon found a candidate on a trip to Lexington, Kentucky, where she met a dashing young Army captain named William Henry Harrison. The two fell deeply in love. Much to the chagrin of Hannah's father, didn't think that young William's offer salary was sufficient to support his daughter. The young lovers sidestepped the problem by getting married while her father was away. John incensed didn't speak to his son-in-law for weeks afterward. Damn. William soon went about proving what he was made of. After serving secretary and delegate to the House of Representatives for the Northwest Territory, he was appointed territorial governor of Indiana. Then in 1811 became a war hero after slaughtering a slew of Indians at the Battle of Tippecanoe. His name was on the lips of important people all over the country, and in 1860 he was elected to the House of Representatives. From there, his career in politics really took off, from positions in the Ohio and U.S. Senate to a gig as America's first minister to Colombia. Nice. But while William was off being important, Anna stayed home and did the real work, running a household and raising a throng of children. Life on the frontier was no picnic, and Hannah had to draw on all of her faith, education, and strength of character to endure what can only be called the unendurable. Though William had become a man of significance, he never earned enough money to make his vast family very comfortable. Grassland, the family mansion in Venice, I think that's how you say, Indiana, was as much a fort as it was a home. The comforts of civilization were rare and dearly purchased, and hostile Indians filled the countryside. By 1840, six of Anne's children had succumbed to the grim realities of frontier life. Little wonder then that the embattled woman looked forward to her husband's retirement, when he could be with her all the time. William, however, had other ideas. In 1836, he ran for president. Anne was delighted when he lost, only to find worse fear come true in 1840, when he won. She wept openly, terrified that the demands of the White House would rob her of the last years of her husband's life. While she stayed in Indiana, awaiting whether to travel, William, 68 years old, damn, proceeded to Washington to give his inaugural address without it. The new president spoke for an incredible hour and 45 minutes, all while suffering frigid weather without gloves or a hat. Oh yeah, him! I heard about him and what happened to him all the time. The ordeal paves the way for pneumonia, which killed him on April 4th, 1841, and his grim prediction had come true. She had planned on making the trip east in May. During Harrison's single month as president, their widowed daughter-in-law, Jane Irwin Harrison, had filled the role of White House hostess, and remains the only first lady to have never stepped foot in the executive mansion, besides Martha Washington, of course, whose reign came before the house was built. In the end, the worries that Anna's father had about William's failure to provide for her came true. The late president left his poor wife shadowed with debt, much of which had to be paid off by the $25,000 pension voted her by a sympathetic Congress. For the rest of her long life, she lived in relative poverty. Holy shit. I forgot about him. Because he's rarely mentioned. Because, as you just heard, he had a short stint. He had the shortest presidency in presidential history. Well, FDR had the longest. Harrison had the shortest. Holy hell. He was stupid. And you would think that at 68 years old, he would be smart enough to know to not go without hat, gloves, jacket, everything. Or to, I don't know, reschedule the inauguration for another day when it wasn't so wet and cold. But I guess not. Anyways. Please rate, comment, and subscribe down below. And if you're on YouTube, please ring that bell notification so that you can know when I upload. And if you're on TikTok, please like and follow my videos. And if you want my username for eBay and or Mercari, comment down below, okay? Bye.